A great number of people are not aware that many of the key pieces of evidence that are presented to the world from atheists are not proofs which are scientifically feasible. The title of this video is The Invisible Evidence of the Atheist. For many years, atheists have ridiculed Christians for believing in an invisible God. Today, the atheist presents the world with invisible evidence to try and prove that God does not exist. I will submit 3 of these invisible pieces of evidence and demonstrate the absurdity of the atheist hypothesis. Number 1, the theory of other invisible universes. Number 2, invisible missing links. And number 3, the invisible ancient manuscripts. Many of the facts stated here are from my own book, A Universe from God, The True Origin of the Cosmos. First, the hypothesis of other invisible universes is one of the most bizarre ideas that purports to be science, but is merely conjecture. In an attempt at refuting the evidence for a universe that is fine-tuned for life, the atheist today presents an assertion that other universes exist which have caused our universe. These ideas exist only in the theoretical as mathematical calculations, but not in the real world. These ideas are not science because they cannot be observed or tested. Lee Smolin is an American theoretical physicist and cosmologist. He said that there is no direct scientific evidence that other universes have been created by quantum fluctuations in quantum vacuum, or that we live in a multiverse. The only reason that atheist scientists have proposed the idea of the multiverse, or in some cases the bulk universe, is to try and impeach the true science of a universe which exists by a process of fine-tuned constants. The premise of the multiverse was developed scientifically to try and refute the reality that a fine-tuned universe demands an intelligence who engineered these laws. The fact that the universe is specifically tuned for life is indisputable. In a desperate attempt to refute the uniqueness of certain constants which exist by apparent design, atheist theoretical physicists have resorted to the creation of an entirely new assault on the anthropic principle. One of the world's leading quantum theorists, Dr. John Polkinghorne, describes the illusion of the multiverse. Far outside physics, but in the strictest sense metaphysics, there is no purely scientific reason to believe in an ensemble of universes. By construction of these other worlds are unknowable to us. An impossible explanation of equal intellectual respectability, and to my mind, Polkinghorne says, greater economy and elegance would be that this one world is the way it is because it is the creation of the will of a creator who purposes that it should be so. Noted cosmologist Edward Harrison describes the fine-tuning that is a firm reality of the universe as prima facie evidence of deistic design. Co-discoverer of the cosmic background radiation that confirmed the universe had a beginning about 14 billion years ago, Dr. Arno Penzias describes the push for the multiverse as a solution to end the reality of a universe designed for life as a frightening reality that many scientists cannot accept. Dr. Penzias said, "Some people are uncomfortable with the purposefully created world. To come up with things that contradict purpose, they tend to speculate about things they haven't seen." In his book, There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind, Dr. Anthony Flew elaborated on the rather unconvincing way in which most of the world's atheists try to explain the event referred to as the Big Bang and the compelling evidence of a universe which was finely tuned for intelligent life from the first microseconds of its existence. And I quote, "The postulation of multiple universes is a truly desperate alternative. If the existence of one universe requires an explanation, then multiple universes require a much bigger explanation. The problem is increased by the factor of whatever the total number of universes is. It seems a little like the case of the schoolboy whose teacher doesn't believe his dog ate his homework. So he replaces the first version with the story that a pack of dogs, too many to count, ate his homework. First of all, the laws of nature exhibit an incredibly high degree of fine-tuning that is required to produce a life-friendly universe. Second, there's currently no acceptable or testable physical explanation for this fine-tuning. Third, this unlikely fine-tuning represents astronomically high levels of specified complexity embedded in the laws of nature. Fourth, we can only observe our own universe and no others. Therefore, the multiverse postulation is unreasonable and untestable given our current abilities to test anything outside our own visible universe." Atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell, in his well-known book, A History of Western Philosophy, on page 560, he describes the argument for the existence of God based on our universe, which is clearly designed as logical and empirical. Russell states, "This argument contends that on a survey of the known world, we find things which cannot plausibly be explained as the product of blind natural forces, but are much more reasonably to be regarded as evidence of a beneficent purpose. This argument has no formal logical defects. Its premises are empirical and its conclusions professes to be reached in accordance with the usual canons of empirical inference. The question whether it is to be accepted or not turns, therefore, not on the general metaphysical questions, but on the comparatively detailed considerations." George Ellis, PhD, is a mathematician, and he's considered one of the world's leading cosmologists. Dr. Ellis co-authored the famous large-scale structure of space-time in 1973 with Stephen Hawking. He has emphatically stated that the entire purpose of those who seek to push forward the idea of the multiverse is to explain away why our observable universe is fine-tuned. In his conclusions, Dr. Ellis said that the multiverse is not a valid alternative at the current time in cosmology because it cannot be tested or verified. Until such time that this moment arrives, the multiverse should not be considered as a valid reason to exclude the fine-tuning of the universe as proof for creation. Dr. Ellis states, "The trouble is that no possible astronomical observations can ever see these universes. The arguments are indirect at best, and even if the multiverse exists, it leaves the deep mystery of nature unexplained. All the parallel universes lie outside our horizon and remain beyond our capacity to see now or ever, no matter how technology evolves. In fact, they are too far away to have had any influence on our universe whatsoever. That is why none of the claims made by the multiverse enthusiasts can be directly sustained." Dr. Ellis believes that the attempts at passing the multiverse theory off as a viable explanation for our finely tuned universe is not a viable theory at all, because it's impossible to test, which is one of the first rules of science. For this reason, the multiverse is not a serious theorem that should be considered a possible candidate to eliminate the facts at hand, which are: our universe has been designed and finely tuned by an intelligent source. A remarkable fact about our universe is that physical constants have just the right values needed to allow for complex structures, including living things. Steven Weinberg, Martin Rees, Leonard Susskind, and others contend that an exotic multiverse proves a tidy explanation for this apparent coincidence. Weinberg states, "If all possible values occur in a large enough collection of universes, then viable ones for life will surely be found somewhere." In other words, just like the hypothesis that given enough time, all life could come from a single organism, so also with enough universes, one will certainly begin with the number of constants that we find in our universe, which is allowed for human life. Both evolution and the multiverse rely upon the idea of unlimited numbers to allow for their possibility. The problem is that the numbers required for both evolution and an infinite number of other universes are so large that they are beyond the realm of possibility. Proponents of the multiverse make one final argument, that there are no good alternatives. The idea that our universe and human life came into existence as a result of intelligence, i.e., a being of infinite capacity, is never really considered, but instead, the multiverse is proposed by atheists who do not believe God exists. This is despite the scientific evidence we can observe that our universe is clearly designed for life because it has anthropic constants which are necessary for life, and they cannot come into existence by any natural process. One of the basic faults of logic in considering the validity of the multiverse theorem is found in a point made by Dr. Ellis. He quotes, "It's estimated that close to 110 billion human beings have lived upon the earth. Despite the great numbers of genetic replications, not once has anyone observed an exact duplicate of any existing human being. The laws of genetics precludes this possibility. Surpassing the complexity of the human genome is the universe itself. Can anyone believe that the precise physical constants which exist in this universe, the odds of which are incalculable, could be duplicated a second, third, or countless other times in any other universe as even a remote possibility? The demands of such a reality," he continues, "require the multiverse theorem to be defined as impossible until empirical proof can be offered to prove otherwise." Dr. Richard Lewontin, the Alexander Agassiz Professor of Zoology at Harvard University, put it like this: "It's not that the methods and the institutions of science somehow compel us to accept the material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." So the idea here is that the multiverse argument cannot possibly diminish the fact that our universe exhibits the clear fingerprints of design, tuning, and masterful order. To these facts, no argument can countermand them. The scientific evidence we do have today proves that before the universe began, nothing existed. No time, no space, no matter. So the question arises, why did the universe begin at that precise moment when nothing had existed before? Since there was no space to contain matter and no matter to fill that space, where did these come from since nothing existed prior? Now, despite the efforts of atheist scientists, no alternative that's scientifically viable has ever been presented. There's only two possibilities for the universe that we find ourselves in. Either it happened by accident or it happened on purpose. There are no others. The scientific data we do have suggests that there's no possibility that the trillions of stars, the planets, and the galaxies simply came into existence by a natural process. The fine-tuning of the universe began in the first moment of the universe, within picoseconds. The rate of expansion for the early universe was just right. If the energy expansion in that first second was slightly larger, then gravitational forces necessary to form stars and planets would have not taken place. If the expansion of energy was slightly smaller, the universe would have collapsed back onto itself again. If the initial expansion of energy was greater than the capacity of gravitational forces to pull all this matter back together and eventually form galaxies and stars, life many billions of years later would have not been possible. Mathematical physicists have calculated that at the first second of the universe, the expansion of energy and gravitational forces differed by less than 1 part in a million billion, or 10 to the 15th power. This is not possible in an undirected, haphazard universe. The amount of weak nuclear force was also just right. The ratio of protons and neutrons was perfect to allow helium to form that would be needed for the formation of stars much later. The amount of strong nuclear forces was just right. This allowed helium to burn precisely slow enough so that elements could form. The ratio of gravity to electromagnetism are balanced also precisely. If this ratio between gravity and electromagnetism was increased by only 1 in 10 to the 40th power, only very small stars would have formed. If the ratio were decreased by the same amount, only very large stars would have formed. This is how fine this adjustment was. In order for life to be possible, there must be both large and small stars present in our universe. Large stars produce the elements needed for life, and small stars burn at the precise rate required to sustain life on a planet such as Earth. The gravitational force at the beginning of the universe was perfect. How is this possible by a natural process? The answer is easy. It's not. If gravity was any stronger at the early formation of the universe, then all the stellar matter would bind stronger and stars would use their nuclear fuel at a drastically increased rate, making life impossible on Earth much, much later. If gravity was any weaker, matter would not have likely clumped together to form much larger structures that became larger stars. The universe has the precise balance of matter and antimatter. Russian physicist Andrei Sakharov, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1975, he first showed in 1967 that matter and antimatter in the universe are not evenly balanced. Had they been evenly distributed or evenly balanced at 50-50, the only remaining energy left in the universe would have been photons, making the universe as we know it impossible. Because matter is slightly greater than antimatter, about 1 part in 1 billion, all of the stars and the planets in the universe, as well as all life on Earth, can exist. The precise amount of carbon was also formed in stars early in the universe. Every human being is made from carbon. This carbon was made in a star that was formed before our solar system came into being. Every carbon nucleus contains 6 protons and 6 neutrons, and they are made from 3 nuclei of helium constructed in a star. Now, so that life might be possible, carbon must be scattered into space in the form of dust during the explosion of a star. and then formed into a second or third generation star system that will develop planets from this dust. It's interesting when we consider this that our own solar system, in which the Earth is located, is one of these third generation star systems. Astrophysicist Edwin Salpeter and Fred Hoyle discovered that in this process of forming carbon, it only works by a very unique feature during a mode of resonance with finely tuned energy. If any part of this feature was changed, even minutely, let's say less than 1% in either direction, then no carbon would exist in the universe to make life possible. Again, we see how finely tuned these attributes are to make life possible. The events which took place immediately after the universe began were precisely controlled to exact a specific outcome that would produce the proper environment for second and third generation stars, the production of carbon, both essential for the creation of human beings. There are over 120 fine-tuned anthropic physical constants which exist in the universe that we know of, that must all be precisely set within limits of tolerance no more than 10 to the 40th. Vary those either way, even minutely, and we all cease to exist. Change any one of these 122 constants, which are fine-tuned, and all life ceases to exist. In examining these anthropic constants, we find that intelligence is necessary in order for these narrow boundaries to exist. Imagine a radio receiver before you that has 122 dials, and each one of these dials must be precisely tuned to an exact setting before human beings can live on Earth. For a majority of these settings, their tolerances, again, are less than 1 part in a quadrillion or a million billion or 10 to the 15th. Now, sitting at this control panel, alter any one of these dials by 10 to the 15th, and life on Earth would cease to exist. The reason that we are able to conclude that these anthropic constants and their precise settings are evidence for God is because nothing of such a precise nature could exist in the natural realm and apart from a purposeful origin. The very nature of evolution is that random acts over long periods of time cause things to exist. In order for life to be present on Earth, all of these constants must be set first. Evolution cannot produce 122 simultaneous events in the universe beginning from the start of the universe and all set precisely at one time. The only way that this could happen is if someone set these dials before humans appeared on Earth. No natural or evolutionary process has the capacity to fine-tune an environment before it begins. The entire premise of evolution is that small changes took place over great expanses of time. Now, unless these constants were all in place first, life could never have begun. Since this is a certainty, it precludes the theory of evolution progressing to any certainty. In essence, the presence of a fine-tuned universe is empirical evidence for the existence of God and the impossibility of evolution or any naturalistic process to explain how life could exist. I've spent the majority of time on this first point because the existence of the universe is the most compelling argument for the existence of God. And really, this is precisely what God has said in His own Word as the greatest proof for His existence. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, it says in the text, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and His Godhead, so that we are all without excuse to say that God doesn't exist." The second invisible missing piece of evidence is the invisible missing links that are put forth by atheists. The idea that life evolved from a single organism is supported by the tree of life, which shows intermediate species within the branches of this tree which actually don't exist. The massive fossil record that Earth presents to us has never produced a single intermediate species. Even after 150 years of Darwinian evolution and all the claims of every species having evolved as allegedly proven by these missing links, no evidence of these missing links in this tree of life have ever been found. The only evolutionary process that has been proven is adaptability within species, not a complete evolutionary process which is alleged by these missing links in the tree of life. Science can only prove that all life comes from prior life. No proof for spontaneous life has ever been scientifically observed or proven. The third piece of invisible evidence that is put forth by atheist theologians and New Testament scholars is the invisible ancient manuscripts they describe. In order to refute the reliability of the four Gospels, which record Jesus as God, crucified, and risen 3 days later, a theory has been presented by the Q manuscript, which is purported to be the source from where the Gospel writers wrote the four narratives of Jesus. The problem is that there is no Q manuscript that's ever been found in the historical record. The physical evidence that we do have from our extant 24,593 New Testament manuscripts proves that the four Gospels were written by four separate and distinct authors. Their narratives are based upon eyewitness testimony from persons who saw and heard Jesus when he claimed to be God, and who watched as he performed supernatural works which were only possible by someone who had the power of God. The world asks for proof that God exists. He comes to earth in the person of Jesus Christ and presents us with all the supernatural powers we would expect from God, yet the world rejects him. In the text of these four Gospels, the writers are very careful to tell us that what they're writing is intended as a historical record of true events. They make statements that are certain that what they have written is the truth and they're not lying. In 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16 through 18, Peter writes, "For we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory when such a voice came to him from heaven, from the excellent glory, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.'" And Peter said, "Hey, I heard this voice which came from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain." John states in his Gospel, chapter 19, verse 35, "And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he's telling the truth, so that you might believe." Again, John states in 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, "We saw Jesus with our own eyes, and we touched him with our own hands. He is the word of life. This one, who is life itself, was revealed to us, and we have seen him. And now we testify and we proclaim to you that he is the one who is eternal life. We proclaim to you what we ourselves have actually seen and heard." So there's no mistake that this is eyewitness, first-hand testimony. These men state that they have seen Jesus perform miracles and raise the dead, and they saw it with their own eyes. They touched Jesus with their hands after he arose from the dead, and they are certain that these things that they wrote really happened. So let's recap what we've talked about. Number one, we have a universe that could not have come into existence by itself. Therefore, it was caused. The only possible cause is a being of infinite intelligence. The universe proves the existence of God. Number two, there's never been scientific evidence presented to the world that proves that life began spontaneously. All the proof that we do have demands that all creatures on earth appeared here suddenly and fully formed exactly as the Bible states. Number three, the New Testament is a historical record of the man called Jesus, the Messiah, who possessed the powers of life and death that only God could retain. He performed every proof that we would expect from someone who would claim to be God. And he said that he is the living God who created all that exists. Jesus was crucified for our sins, according to the prophecies of the Hebrew prophets, and raised himself from the dead, as the Hebrew prophets also predicted. We have today all the proof that any reasonable person could demand or expect for the existence of God. God exists in the person of Jesus Christ. He is the creator of all that exists, and he is the only Savior of the world.